Cartoons have always promised magic, laughter, and comfort, but sometimes studios squeeze their golden geese too hard. Instead of timeless treasures, they churn out awkward shadows, spin-offs nobody asked for. These weren't just minor missteps, they were full-on animated disasters. Today, we revisit the forgotten experiments that tried to cash in on greatness but crashed into ridicule. Ready to cringe? The Flintstone Kids, 1986. The Flintstones defined television's first animated family, capturing audiences with Stone Age humor that cleverly mirrored modern life. But in 1986, Hanna-Barbera rolled the dice with the Flintstone Kids, a spin-off that imagined Fred, Barney, Wilma, and Betty as schoolchildren navigating suburban-style adventures. On paper, it sounded like a fresh way to introduce the franchise to younger viewers. In reality, it was a miscalculation that stripped the characters of their appeal. The original series worked because it satirized adult life with Stone Age versions of cars, televisions, and suburban headaches. But the kids' version lacked that clever parallel. Instead, audiences got recycled plots of playground rivalries, moral lessons about bullying, and just say no after-school specials. Fred and Barney's mischievous charm evaporated when their stories revolved around class clowns and homework. Worse yet, the show leaned heavily into 1980s trends, shoehorning in rock music spoofs, neon visuals, and even anti-drug messages. Critics accused the series of pandering, while longtime fans wondered why anyone thought reimagining Bedrock as a suburban grade school made sense. The humor fell flat, and without adult satire or clever writing, the show quickly sank into obscurity. The legacy of the Flintstone Kids is a reminder that not every classic needs a childhood makeover. When you de-age legends and strip away the wit that made them iconic, you're left with hollow shells of beloved characters. Pink Panther and Sons, 1984. The Pink Panther is one of animation's most stylish creations, sleek, wordless, and eternally cool. He didn't need dialogue. His humor flowed from sly gestures, jazz rhythms, and slapstick wit. But in 1984, Hanna-Barbera decided the world needed more. They gave him a family in Pink Panther and Sons, turning the quiet trickster into a suburban dad with two talkative kids. Fans were baffled. Why would an enigmatic, wordless character suddenly anchor a series about child-rearing and neighborhood adventures? The Panther himself barely appeared, overshadowed by his new offspring, Pinky and Panky, who spoke in generic Saturday morning voices. Instead of the Panther's signature sophistication, viewers were treated to predictable lesson of the week plots about teamwork, honesty, or standing up to bullies. Critics didn't hold back. Reviewers called it a betrayal of the character's essence, stripping away everything unique about him. The Panther's silence, once his greatest strength, was abandoned for sitcom-style chatter. Jazz, which had defined his entire persona, was replaced by forgettable cartoon jingles. The audience response was tepid. Kids didn't find the new characters compelling, while adults who loved the original films and shorts dismissed it as cheap brand exploitation. The series limped through a single season before disappearing, leaving the once golden franchise tarnished. Looking back, Pink Panther and Sons feels like an attempt to domesticate a character who thrived on mystery and style. By giving the Panther a family, the show accidentally destroyed the very mystique that made him timeless. Yogi, 1991. By the early 1990s, Yogi Bear had lost much of his cultural weight. Once the cheeky star of Jellystone Park, he was struggling to connect with a generation raised on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and video games. Hanna-Barbera tried to fix that with Yogi, a radical reimagining that pushed the beloved bear into neon-soaked malls as a teenage skateboard-riding detective. Yes, you heard that right. Yogi and Boo Boo as teenage mall cops. The redesign gave them baseball caps, slang-heavy dialogue, and plots revolving around shopping malls, missing sneakers, and extreme sports. The goal was clear: to modernize Yogi for a hip new generation. The execution? A cringe-worthy disaster. Longtime fans were horrified. Yogi's charm had always come from his forest antics, stealing picnic baskets with sly humor. In Yo Yogi, that forest magic was gone, replaced by brand tie-ins, product placement, and half-hearted mysteries. Even the animation style reflected the awkward attempt to be cool, drenched in neon colors that screamed early 90s excess. Critics quickly pounced. They slammed the show as a desperate cash grab that misunderstood what made Yogi beloved. The young target audience didn't buy it either. Instead of embracing the radical makeover, they turned back to edgier hits like Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Adventures. Ratings collapsed, and the series ended after only a handful of episodes. Yo Yogi stands today as a textbook example of what happens when studios chase trends instead of honoring characters' roots. The bear who once charmed generations with wit and mischief became a victim of forced modernization, and the audience never forgave it. The New Adventures of Gilligan, 1974. When Gilligan's Island ended its live-action run in the 1960s, it quickly found a second life in syndication, becoming a cult favorite. But by the mid-1970s, producers thought the story still had legs, this time in animated form. Thus came The New Adventures of Gilligan, a Saturday morning cartoon that attempted to recapture the shipwrecked antics with simplified animation and kid-friendly storylines. Unfortunately, what made the original sitcom fun, its slapstick humor, quirky chemistry, and wink-at-the-camera absurdity, was completely lost in translation. The characters, while voiced by most of the original cast, felt like hollow versions of themselves. Gilligan's bumbling was exaggerated into outright stupidity. The professor became a background character, and the iconic Skipper Gilligan dynamic dissolved into tired gags that repeated week after week. The plots didn't help. While the live-action series thrived on outlandish schemes to escape the island, the cartoon replaced them with child-oriented lessons and recycled Hanna-Barbera slapstick. Even worse, the show introduced a talking parrot named Stubby, an unnecessary sidekick whose squawking commentary quickly grated on audiences. Critics tore into the show for cheap animation, lifeless scripts, and the sheer audacity of watering down a cult favorite. Even loyal fans of Gilligan's Island largely ignored it, dismissing it as a pale imitation. The series limped along for just 2 years before fading into obscurity, remembered mostly for what it failed to achieve. In the end, The New Adventures of Gilligan demonstrated that some shows thrive on their cast's physicality and charm, qualities impossible to replicate with static animation. The Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, 1980. Few cartoon duos in history hold the same legendary status as Tom and Jerry. Their 1940s shorts, filled with ingenious slapstick, remain timeless masterpieces of animation. But when Filmation took the reins in 1980 with the Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, audiences quickly discovered that lightning doesn't always strike twice. The series attempted to revive the classic chase formula, but on a Saturday morning budget. The lush, detailed animation of the originals was gone, replaced with stiff, clunky movements and flat backgrounds. The visual wit that made Tom and Jerry so special was sacrificed in favor of speed. Episodes were churned out quickly, but without the artistry that defined their golden age. Worse still, the violence and mayhem were toned down significantly to appease television standards of the time. Instead of over-the-top gags with anvils, explosives, and ingenious traps, viewers were treated to tame scuffles that ended with predictable slapstick. The characters felt neutered, stripped of their chaotic brilliance. Critics noticed immediately. Reviewers called the show a hollow shadow of its predecessors, while audiences, accustomed to the brilliance of the originals still running in syndication, had no patience for the watered-down version. Ratings slumped, and the series was axed after 1 season. Looking back, the Tom and Jerry comedy show stands as proof that some cartoons are lightning in a bottle. Without the artistry, timing, and boldness of the original creators, even beloved characters can fall flat. The Dukes, 1983. When the Dukes of Hazzard dominated primetime television, CBS sought to extend its popularity to younger audiences. Enter the Dukes, an animated spin-off produced by Hanna-Barbera in 1983. Instead of small-town car chases and Southern comedy, the cartoon sent the Duke boys and Daisy on a bizarre globe-trotting adventure against Boss Hogg and Sheriff Roscoe. Gone were the dirt roads and iconic General Lee leaping over creeks. Instead, the Dukes raced across international landscapes, from Paris to the Sahara Desert, in what was essentially a never-ending race-around-the-world plotline. Each episode followed the same formula. Boss Hogg cheated, the Dukes improvised, and somehow good triumphed. It was repetitive, predictable, and devoid of the rural charm that made the original series beloved. The animation didn't help either. Hanna-Barbera's cost-cutting was obvious, with recycled backgrounds, stock car chase sequences, and stilted character designs. Fans who tuned in expecting the rowdy humor of the live-action show instead got sanitized adventures that felt more like Scooby-Doo clones than Hazard County hijinks. Reception was dismal. Adults who loved the primetime show didn't care for a cartoon adaptation, while kids found the international races tedious. To make matters worse, the cartoon arrived during a contract dispute with the live-action actors, so the early episodes featured replacement voices for Bo and Luke Duke. Fans rejected it outright. The series sputtered to an end after just 2 short seasons. Today, the Dukes is remembered only as an odd footnote in Hanna-Barbera's history, a spin-off that tried to turn Southern fried mischief into a world race, only to lose its way entirely. The Addams Family, 1992. The Addamses were television royalty in the 1960s, and their spooky charm resurfaced with Tim Burton-inspired mania in the early 1990s after the success of the live-action films. Hoping to ride that wave, Hanna-Barbera launched the Addams Family animated series in 1992. But rather than delivering the macabre wit audiences adored, the show diluted the family's gothic identity into child-friendly fluff. Instead of dark satire about suburban norms, viewers got watered-down misadventures that leaned on predictable gags. Gomez and Morticia's eccentric romance became background dressing, while Uncle Fester and Lurch devolved into clumsy comic relief. Even Wednesday, who had been a beacon of deadpan creepiness, was softened into a quirky but harmless kid. The animation was bright and colorful, stripping away the eerie atmosphere essential to the Addams mystique. Critics complained that the family's edge had been blunted into a generic Saturday morning formula, robbing them of their unique cultural bite. Kids who tuned in out of curiosity often found themselves underwhelmed, while longtime Addams fans were disappointed by how far the characters had drifted from their roots. The show lasted 2 brief seasons before fading into obscurity. With the films still dominating pop culture at the time, the cartoon felt irrelevant and unnecessary. Its greatest crime wasn't just poor writing or recycled slapstick, it was robbing the Addamses of their wonderfully unsettling charm. In hindsight, the Addams Family cartoon serves as a cautionary tale. Some characters can only thrive in the shadows. When you drag them into neon light, their magic evaporates. The New Archies, 1987. Archie Andrews and his Riverdale friends have been staples of American pop culture for decades. But in 1987, NBC thought it was time to repackage them for a new generation. The result was The New Archies, an animated series that de-aged Archie, Betty, Veronica, and Jughead into middle school preteens. The idea was to blend Archie's classic charm with a modern 80s twist. It backfired spectacularly. The Archie gang worked best as teens grappling with romance, rivalry, and small-town escapades. By turning them into awkward tweens, the show stripped away the very dynamics that made their stories compelling. Instead of love triangles and teen drama, plots revolved around school dances, petty rivalries, and moral lesson endings. The attempt to modernize also rang hollow. Characters suddenly wore neon fashions and spouted awkward 80s slang, but the forced coolness came across as out of touch rather than authentic. Animation was cheap and clunky, further dragging the show down. Critics and fans alike dismissed it, and the series vanished after one season. Unlike the timeless comics or even later modern adaptations like Riverdale, the new Archies felt hopelessly dated almost immediately. Ultimately, the show proved that reimagining icons only works when you respect their essence. By stripping away Archie's teenage angst and humor, the spin-off left Riverdale looking bland, hollow, and instantly forgettable. Partridge Family 2200 A.D., 1974. Riding the success of the Jetsons and the Flintstones, Hanna-Barbera made a bold, if baffling, decision: launch Partridge Family 2200 A.D., a futuristic cartoon spin-off of the popular live-action sitcom The Partridge Family. It was as strange as it sounds. Instead of focusing on the family's wholesome adventures as a traveling band, the cartoon catapulted them into the 23rd century. Suddenly, the Partridges were piloting spaceships, befriending aliens, and performing intergalactic concerts. Gone was the grounded charm of a musical family navigating everyday struggles. In its place, sci-fi slapstick and cosmic cliches. Fans of the original sitcom were bewildered. The live-action Partridge Family worked because it blended music, heart, and family values. By transplanting them into a Jetsons-like world, the show lost every ounce of relatability. Even worse, David Cassidy, the breakout teen idol of the original series, refused to reprise his role, leaving his animated counterpart voiced by someone else. For viewers, it was a glaring void. The animation itself was recycled and uninspired, often borrowing heavily from Hanna-Barbera's other futuristic series. Critics tore into it for being a desperate, soulless attempt to milk a brand past its expiration date. Ratings tanked, and the show was canceled within a single season. Today, Partridge Family 2200 AD survives only as a footnote in the long list of misguided Saturday morning experiments. It remains a testament to how quickly charm evaporates when you hurl beloved characters into a world where they simply don't belong. The Mork and Mindy, Laverne, and Shirley Fonz-Hour, 1982. In the late 70s and early 80s, television crossovers were all the rage. But ABC pushed the idea into absurd territory when it launched The Mork and Mindy, Laverne, and Shirley Fonz-Hour in 1982. Yes, you read that correctly. A single animated series mashed together three completely different sitcom properties: Robin Williams' alien antics from Mork and Mindy, the Milwaukee hijinks of Laverne and Shirley, and the cool swagger of Fonzie from Happy Days. On paper, it was supposed to be a Saturday morning ratings juggernaut. In reality, it was chaos. Each half-hour block spliced the characters into bizarre storylines that had little to do with their original appeal. Mork's surreal humor was flattened into repetitive catchphrases. Laverne and Shirley, already misplaced in a military cartoon spin-off, were dragged even further from their roots. Fonzie was reduced to riding his motorcycle through absurd plots with his dog, Mr. Cool, tagging along. The animation was rushed and awkward, the writing clumsy, and the once iconic characters were stripped of their quirks. Critics accused the show of being stitched together from spare parts, with no understanding of what made each sitcom special. Even Robin Williams, who had electrified audiences as Mork, was absent. The producers replaced him with a sound-alike voice actor, draining the character of his energy. Audiences tuned out almost immediately. By the end of its single season, the show had cemented itself as one of ABC's most notorious Saturday morning flops. Instead of expanding the legacies of beloved sitcoms, it managed to tarnish all three at once. Sometimes combining too many ingredients doesn't make a feast. It just creates a mess. Popeye and Son, 1987. Few animated icons have endured as long as Popeye the Sailor. From the 1930s Fleischer shorts to his spinach-fueled antics on television, Popeye thrived as a symbol of resilience and slapstick wit. But in 1987, Hanna-Barbera decided to age him up and give him a family. Enter Popeye and Son, a spin-off that tried to pass the sailor's torch to the next generation. The premise followed Popeye's young son, Junior, who inherited none of his father's grit or charm. Instead of eating spinach and battling Bluto, Junior was portrayed as a reluctant kid embarrassed by his dad's quirks. Episodes often revolved around playground, rivalries, sports competitions, and family misunderstandings, with spinach awkwardly shoehorned in as a recurring gag. What fans loved about Popeye, his scrappy determination, bizarre speech, and over-the-top battles, was almost completely absent. The humor was watered down into generic moral lessons, while Popeye himself was relegated to a background figure serving as a dad archetype rather than the star. Even Bluto returned, but not as a threatening rival. Instead, he too had a son, leading to predictable junior versus junior rivalries. Critics panned the show as joyless, and audiences quickly tuned out. The character designs felt bland compared to Popeye's surreal, rubbery origins, and the writing lacked the anarchic wit that made him iconic. Within a single season, the show was gone, leaving behind a weak legacy. Popeye and Son wasn't just a flop, it was a cautionary tale. Some characters are timeless precisely because they don't change. By taming Popeye into a sitcom dad, Hanna-Barbera erased the very chaos that had kept him alive for decades. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones, 1987. Two of Hanna-Barbera's crown jewels, the Flintstones and the Jetsons, had each defined their eras, one parodying the prehistoric nuclear family, the other envisioning a gleaming future. In 1987, executives thought, why not combine them? The result was The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones, a TV movie intended as a cross-generational blockbuster. Instead, it became a glaring example of brand collision gone wrong. The premise was simple. Elroy Jetson invents a time machine that malfunctions, sending the Jetsons back to the Stone Age. Cue culture clash hijinks with Fred, Wilma, and the Bedrock Gang. But while the idea sounded promising, the execution fell flat. Instead of witty satire, viewers got predictable old versus new jokes recycled endlessly. George Jetson marveling at stone cars, Fred fumbling with futuristic gadgets, and both families predictably learning to get along. The animation was passable, but the writing felt forced. Neither family was given room to shine, as the crossover diluted both shows into a bland middle ground. Critics derided it as a soulless stunt, engineered to reignite waning interest in both franchises. Fans of the Jetsons felt their futuristic whimsy had been reduced to slapstick, while Flintstones loyalists resented the intrusion of space-age gadgets into Bedrock. While it drew curiosity ratings upon release, its legacy is one of disappointment. The film proved that combining two icons doesn't always create double the magic. Sometimes it only highlights how unique they were apart. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones remains a cultural oddity, remembered less for its story and more as the moment when two beloved worlds collided and cracked under the weight of corporate ambition. Spin-offs are gambles. Sometimes they breathe new life into legends, but other times they bury them under failed experiments. These 15 disasters prove that even icons can stumble when studios chase trends over timeless charm. Which forgotten spin-off do you remember most? Like, subscribe, and share your pick in the comments.